The first sign that something was wrong came with the smallest number 207. It looked so harmless on the screen, so ordinary, like the kind of thing most people would ignore without a second thought. But my gut twisted the moment I saw it. My father had just bought a new iPhone. For most families, that might not seem like a big deal, but for my dad, a man who still kept a drawer full of old flip phones just in case, switching to a smartphone was monumental. He didn't like change, especially when it came to technology. But after years of my mother's nagging and my gentle persuasion, he finally agreed. Fine, he'd grumbled in the store as I handed the cashier his credit card. But don't expect me to know how to use the damn thing. So that evening, I sat with him at the kitchen table, the new iPhone gleaming between us like some alien device. My mum hovered in the background, washing dishes, occasionally glancing over her shoulder with a smile. We set up his Apple ID, synced his contacts, and downloaded the essential apps, weather, maps, email. Then came the banking application. That was when I noticed it. Scrolling through his recent transactions, one line stood out, $2.07 service. Adjustment.it was small enough to dismiss, and my dad almost did. Probably a fee, he said, squinting at the screen. Banks love their fees, but something about it bothered me. Maybe it was the vagueness of the description. Maybe it was the fact that it repeated. Because when I scrolled further back, I saw more of them. $2.11, $1.89, $2.34, always under some generic label: maintenance, adjustment, update. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I work in tech. I know how fraud works. Real scams rarely start with large, obvious withdrawals. They start with crumbs, just enough to stay invisible. Dad, I said slowly, turning the phone toward him, have you ever noticed these before? He shook his head. No, why would I? It's just a couple bucks. Not worth worrying about, but I was worried. That night, after my parents went to bed, I stayed up with my laptop. I dug through 10 years of their online statements, downloading PDFs, scrolling through page after page. And the more I looked, the worse it got. At first, the trickle seemed harmless: $2 here, $3 there. But over a decade, those crumbs added up to nearly $24,000. It wasn't just the money, it was the method. Whoever was behind this knew exactly what they were doing, small enough to stay under the radar, disguised under official-sounding names, spread out over years, so the theft became part of the background noise of everyday life, like someone bleeding. As drop by drop, I remember sitting back in my chair, staring at the numbers, feeling a weight pressing on my chest. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a one-time glitch. This was a system, a machine, and my parents had been caught in it. For 10 years. The next morning, I confronted my mum first. She was in the kitchen, making coffee, the smell filling the air. I spread the statements across the table like evidence in a trial. Have you ever seen these? I asked, pointing to the little withdrawals. She adjusted her glasses, frowned, and shook her head. No, we trusted the reports the company sent. They always looked fine. All those graphs and charts, everything going up. We never thought to check. Her voice trembled as she spoke, and I could see the guilt creeping into her face. My mum had always been the one handling household bills. My dad handled the big picture finances, the investments, the retirement accounts. But she trusted him. He trusted the company. And nobody had noticed the theft happening right under their noses. When my dad came into the kitchen a few minutes later, I showed him the totals. His reaction was quieter. He didn't shout or curse. He just sat down heavily in a chair and folded his hands together, staring at the table like it was an altar. I trusted them, he whispered. I trusted them with everything we worked for. His voice cracked on the last word, and in that moment, I swear I saw him age 10 years. That was the real theft, not the money, but the trust. I started calling the company that same day. At first, they brushed me off. Those are standard processing fees, the woman on the phone said in a rehearsed tone, but when I pressed for details, what services, what adjustments, where was this? Written in the contract, her voice grew colder. It's all outlined in your agreement, sir. Except it wasn't. I had already scanned every page of their paperwork, every clause, every microscopic footnote. Nowhere did it say they could siphon off $2 here, $3 there. So I pushed harder. I asked to speak with managers. I demanded documentation. And slowly, the company's tone shifted from condescending to defensive. "We'll review the situation and get back to you," one manager finally said. Weeks passed, then months. Nothing changed. Meanwhile, I began digging deeper. Nights that should have been spent sleeping, I spent cross-referencing financial records, searching online forums, contacting regulators. That's when I discovered we weren't alone. There were others, families across the state who had quietly lost money the same way. Some had never noticed. Others had noticed but dismissed it as bank fees. A few had fought back, only to be told it was an error, and given a token refund of $50 or $100. The pattern was always the same: tiny withdrawals, vague labels, a paper trail designed to look official, and the more I dug, the more obvious it became. This wasn't sloppiness. This was a strategy. I'll never forget the night I told my parents what I'd found. We were sitting at the kitchen table again, the same table where I'd eaten cereal as a kid, when my parents had balanced checkbooks in the days before online banking. I laid out the evidence in front of them: screenshots, statements, forum posts from other victims. "This isn't a mistake," I said quietly. "It's a scam. They've been stealing from you, from people like you, for years." My mum gasped and covered her mouth with her hand. My dad just stared at the papers, his jaw tight. Finally, he looked up at me. His eyes were wet. "Do you think we'll ever get it back?" I didn't know how to answer, because the truth was, in cases like this, justice doesn't always mean restoration. Sometimes it just means exposure. Sometimes the best you get is the satisfaction of dragging the truth into the light, but I couldn't tell him that. Not yet. The company thought we would give up. That was their first mistake. After weeks of stonewalling, I filed an official complaint with the state financial regulator, then another with the Consumer Protection Bureau. I attached screenshots, highlighted withdrawals, and even prepared a spreadsheet showing 10 years of theft adding up to 24,000. But regulators move slowly. Letters take weeks, cases take months. And my parents, ordinary, middle-class people, didn't have the luxury of waiting quietly while their life savings were treated like a piggy bank. So I did something else. I sent everything I had to a journalist. Her name was Marissa Kane. She wrote for the state's biggest newspaper, usually covering politics. But a friend of mine at work knew her cousin and passed along my email. Within 2 days, she called me directly. "I read your documents," she said. "This is big. But I need more than one family. Do you know if there are others?" "Yes," I said instantly. "Dozens, maybe hundreds." That weekend, Marissa came to my parents' house. I'll never forget the sight. My father, who had always been the quiet, polite type, sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of binders, explaining to a journalist how he'd been robbed $2 at a time. His hands shook as he flipped pages, but his voice was steady. "They promised us security," he said. "They gave us theft." Marissa nodded, taking notes. She asked questions no one else had bothered to ask. How did the withdrawals look on paper? How did the reports hide them? What did customer service say? By the time she left, my parents looked lighter. For the first time, someone outside our family believed them. The story broke 2 weeks later. Financial firm accused of decade-long scheme targeting small investors. It wasn't front-page news yet, but it spread like wildfire online. Local TV picked it up, then national blogs. Soon, victims began coming out of the woodwork, dozens of families, then hundreds, each with the same story: tiny withdrawals, always disguised, always brushed off as standard fees. And then came the real bombshell: a whistleblower, a former employee of the firm, hiding behind anonymity, admitted to Marissa that they had been trained to disguise withdrawals under categories like service adjustment and maintenance. He called it the incremental siphon strategy. That phrase hit me like a punch in the stomach. It confirmed everything I already knew. This wasn't negligence. This was deliberate. The company's response was predictable. "This is a misunderstanding." All charges were disclosed to clients, but when the regulator subpoenaed their internal emails, the truth spilled out. Cold, clinical phrases like client compliance threshold and avoid detection through microcharges left no doubt. They had studied how much people would ignore before raising questions. It was a strategy built on human complacency. The investigation dragged on for months, then years. Lawyers argued over definitions. Was it fraud? Or were these legitimate service fees hidden in the fine print? Meanwhile, my parents had to keep living their lives. Every few weeks there was another hearing. In some bland government building with fluorescent lights and stale coffee, my parents would sit on wooden benches, listening as strangers dissected their finances like lab specimens, but something strange happened during those hearings. My parents began to change. My father, who used to nod along to whatever the expert said, started asking sharp questions. Where in the contract does it authorize those charges? Show me the clause. My mother, who used to stay quiet in meetings, began challenging the attorneys themselves. If this was disclosed, then why are there 3 different names for the same fee? They were no longer passive victims. They were fighters. I'll never forget one particular hearing. The company's attorney, a slick man in an expensive suit, tried to argue that the withdrawals were insignificant. Ladies and gentlemen, he said smoothly, we are talking about $2 here, $3 there. Is this really worth all this drama? My father stood up, not angrily, but firmly. Sir, he said, if you steal $2 from me once, maybe it's nothing. If you steal $2 from me every week for 10 years, that's my retirement. That's my security. That's my life. Don't tell me it's insignificant. The room went silent. Even the judge looked impressed. I'd never seen my father like that before. For the first time, I realized the company hadn't just stolen money. They'd awakened something in him. As the months dragged on, our kitchen table transformed into a war room. Stacks of folders, printouts of emails, highlighters, sticky notes, timelines of charges. Some nights, I'd stop by after work and find my parents arguing over strategy like lawyers themselves. My mother pacing the room, waving a document. My father muttering about inconsistencies. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for every family who had been tricked. The breakthrough came when Marissa published a follow-up article. This time, she had the subpoenaed emails. She quoted directly from company executives. Incremental siphon strategy is working. Clients not complaining. Keep adjustments under $3 to avoid detection threshold. Better to bleed small than to risk headlines with big moves. That last line made me sick. They knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't even ashamed. The article exploded online. News stations camped outside the company's headquarters. Protesters showed up with signs, "Give us back our money and stop stealing from families," and suddenly the regulators moved faster. When the settlement finally came, it wasn't perfect. No settlement ever is, but the company was forced to repay not only my parents, but hundreds of families. Some got tens of thousands back. Others got less, depending on how long they'd been clients. The executives lost their licenses. A few even faced prison time. The day the check arrived in the mail, my dad held it like it was both treasure and poison. It's not just about the money, he said quietly. It's about trust, and they can never give that back. He was right. When he finally transferred their investments to a legitimate firm, I asked him how he felt. He thought for a long time, then said one word, lighter, like he'd been carrying a weight for 10 years and only now realized it. And in that moment, I understood something important. Evil doesn't always arrive with alarms and sirens. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it steals $2 at a time. After the settlement, you'd think life would go back to normal. But it didn't. Not really. Yes, my parents got their money back. Yes, the company executives were dragged through court, stripped of licenses, some even sentenced. On paper, justice was served, but trust that was gone. I remember sitting in the living room with my father one evening, just weeks after the case closed. He was holding the glossy quarterly reports the company had mailed him over the years. Perfect charts, rising lines, promises of growth. They looked so convincing, he whispered, almost to himself. All eyes, every line of it. He crumpled one report in his hand, something I'd never seen him do. My father wasn't the kind of man who destroyed things. He was the kind who filed, organized, stored. But now, with one gesture, he admitted what we all knew: the past 10 years had been a mirage. The strangest part, my parents weren't alone. After the story went public, strangers started reaching out to them. Emails, phone calls, even handwritten letters. People from across the country who had been through the same thing. Some had lost more, some had lost less. But all of them carried the same wound: the betrayal of trust. One woman wrote, "I thought I was crazy for questioning those little charges. Thank you for proving I wasn't." Another man called, his voice trembling, saying, "I never noticed the FEs until I saw your story on TV. I checked my statements. They took thousands from me too. My parents had become something they never asked to be, symbols, ordinary people who stood up, fought back, and won, but victory isn't clean. 4 months after, my father double-checked every bill, every utility statement, every grocery receipt. My mother saved. Every email, every letter, even junk mail, terrified that hidden inside was another trick. Once, when her new bank charged her a legitimate $3 card replacement fee, she called me. In a panic. "It's happening again," she said. It took me half an hour to calm her down. That's what fraud does. It rewires you. It teaches you to see danger in every shadow. And yet, in another way, it made them stronger. My parents started attending community meetings about financial literacy. They spoke to local churches, senior centers, even high schools. My father, who once hated speaking in public, would stand at the front of the room and hold up one of those old glossy reports. "Don't trust the paper," he'd say. "Trust the math. Trust what you can verify. If something doesn't make sense, don't ignore it. Don't let anyone tell you it's insignificant." People listened because his voice carried something no book or class could teach: experience. I remember one night after a community meeting, we were walking back to the car. A young couple stopped us in the parking lot. They couldn't have been more than 25. The man shook my father's hand and said, "We pulled out of a shady investment because of your story. You saved us." My father didn't know what to say. He just stood there, stunned. Later in the car, he whispered, "We saved them." It hit me then. This wasn't just about recovering stolen money. This was about preventing it from happening again. The company, of course, tried to rebuild. New name, new branding, new executive leadership, but the internet never forgets. Every time they launched a new campaign, articles about their fraud resurfaced. Every job interview for their former employees, every investor search there. It was waiting. That was their real sentence, permanent exposure, and in a way, that was justice too. One of the hardest moments came when I asked my father if he regretted investing in the first place. He thought for a long time, then shook his head. No, because it wasn't wrong to hope. It wasn't wrong to try to build a future. What was wrong was their choice to exploit that hope. My mother added quietly, "We can rebuild money. What we almost lost was ourselves." But we didn't, and she was right. I want to be honest with you. If you expect a clean, happy ending, this isn't it. My parents will never fully trust financial institutions again. They will always be cautious, always suspicious, but maybe that's the gift hidden in the pain, because now they know the truth. Evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it takes only $2. But if you listen closely enough, if you pay attention, you can catch it before it grows into something much bigger. Today, when I look at them, I don't see victims. I see survivors, fighters, teachers, and every time I log into my own bank account, I hear my father's voice: "Check the math. Don't trust the paper. Never ignore the crumbs." That's the legacy of what happened. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this: don't dismiss the small things. $2 might look like nothing, but over time, it can be everything. Don't assume official means honest. Fraudsters hide behind polished language, logos, and reports. Don't stay silent. My parents could have ignored it, chalked it up to bad luck. Instead, they spoke up, and in doing so, they protected not just themselves, but countless others. In the end, the greatest theft wasn't money. It was trust, and the greatest victory wasn't the settlement check. It was the moment my parents stood up in that courtroom, looked those executives in the eye, and proved they weren't invisible. Because sometimes the most powerful justice isn't in punishing the guilty, it's in making sure the innocent are never ignored again. That's how a single $2 charge exposed a decade of fraud, broke a company, and transformed two ordinary people into fighters.